Hi guys, so I'm in Mauritius today, and even though it's raining, it doesn't even matter. It is just so beautiful here. So I've just wrapped up running a 2-day wildlife photography and cinematography workshop with Russell McLaughlin. And I basically put out the call for questions, general questions in photography, like I do with you guys, but to the attendees of that workshop. And one of them that came through was a good one, and one that I touched on during the workshop, and that was how to improve your composition. Action! Oh my God, that could be an understatement. My advice is don't get bitten before you get a photograph. When it comes to wildlife photography, it can be tricky with all of the factors to consider while shooting. So you know, that might be tracking focus of an animal. You might be in a situation where you can't physically move. You might scare the animal, or you might not be able to get out of the vehicle, for example. So one of the things that I suggested, especially when starting out, if you're unsure of what makes a really strong composition, is to shoot a little bit wider, so that when you get to post-production, you can start playing around with a few composition options, and that way you can play around with the rule of thirds, negative space, that kind of thing. And what you'll find is the more that you do it, especially in post, the more that you'll get an eye for it while you're out in the field, and as you're looking through the viewfinder, you will see immediately what works in terms of composition, and then you'll be able to start committing to those compositions in camera. So then you get to the point where you don't have to crop anymore. And majority of my work, I rarely crop after the fact. It's the composition is done in camera, so you will get to that point just with practice, and that's one of the things that I suggest in terms of getting that practice. If you are a bit unsure, crop and see what works. Have a play. Is it better vertical? Is it still better landscape? Should you crop where, say, the subject, an animal for example, is in the left of frame or the right of frame? Should it be centered? That kind of thing. Okay, this next question is from Carrie Landman. Firstly, she has a few questions, so I'm not going to answer all of them. There's 4, so I'm not going to answer all of them all at once. But one of them that I'll answer today is, what is the most common mistake wildlife photographers make while shooting their subjects? That's a tricky one, just because that would be me making an assumption on the mistakes that people are making. But in my experience, there's a few things that come to mind. When I teach people photography, and especially wildlife photography, the first thing that I drive home, and I'll go on about it, and that is patience. Rarely do people have enough patience when it comes to wildlife. Yes, you need to have the passion for wildlife. I'm going to assume that that's there, and that's why you're interested in the beginning, just like why you're interested in photography as well. But a lot of people don't have the patience to wait for those special moments that are what's going to make a great image. In terms of actual shooting, potentially, if you've got your exposure right, then quite often it's the choice of how you find focus and tracking focus that people tend to have some trouble with. Generally what I will start out with, if I don't know what animal I'm going to see, I'll usually have a single point focus, and that will be the middle point. That's because that's the most sensitive, which means it's going to find focus the quickest. And then I will have that single point focus on continuous focus, and that's my set go-to until I get to the situation. Once I've got to a situation where perhaps I can see the animal is not running off immediately, then I might do a quick switch to finding a static focus point. So that's where you press your shutter, you'll hear a little beep, that means it's found focus, and then I can continue to either recompose my shot or commit to taking the picture there. I often use back button focus, so I will focus separately to my shutter in most cases, which means I can hold focus and recompose as much as I like, press the shutter as much as I like without losing that focal point. And that can be really handy if you have a moving subject, and especially if there's potentially objects in the foreground that might interfere with if you had a continuous focus point and it just keeps trying to search for it, then you're going to miss quite a lot of shots that way. So it just means that if I'm using that single point and continuous as a starting point, it means that if I do see an animal and it is moving quickly and it's literally split-second opportunity, then I've got a better chance of hitting and tracking my shot. So otherwise, depending on the subject, then perhaps I'll go to a continuous focus with a wider focal point as opposed to just one. I might even try 3D tracking on which is what I have on my Nikon D800. And how good that is will come down to the lens that you're using at the time and the lighting conditions as well. So hopefully that answers your questions. That's what comes to mind in terms of biggest mistakes. But if people out there have any particular things that come to mind that they find they're doing, or they making mistakes, or perhaps they're getting frustrated because they don't know if they're making a mistake or not, they're doing a certain way, then by all means ask me and I'll try to answer it for you.